today. Oh, there it is. Click. And we're live. It is Monday, May, whatever the heck it is, 22nd, 23rd, 2022, 5:02 p.m. Kate is a little bit late today. She's stuck in traffic. She will be here. There she is, in fact. She has important questions about Tim's hair, which she doesn't know the answer to because she doesn't listen to Bulwark podcasts, where Tim's hair is the subject of frequent discussion.
And
But
as
we
is
are.
my sartorial choices, as is my language, I just
It's
get
true.
picked
It's
apart.
like it's you're basically the house.
Hi, Kate.
Hi, Tim. Oh my gosh, your hair looks so cute.
I missed you. Thank you.
I
It's not.
missed you
This isn't
too.
even as high and tight as I got it. I went full buzz on the sides before Coachella, but we're about 3 weeks out from
Is
Coachella.
that where you
So it's
got your is that where you got your Elizabeth Warren pearl necklace?
no, that was a present from my husband for Christmas,
It's
and I
beautiful.
requested it because I was really early on the trend because I saw the teenagers wearing them on TikTok. I've been spending a little too much time on TikTok, and I noticed a couple different teens wearing pearl necklaces, and I was like, wait a minute, this seems like it might be a thing, and I think I would look good in a pearl necklace, so I got one, and now I had a friend text me from Amsterdam yesterday, and they're like, every teenager in Amsterdam is in a pearl necklace now, every male teenager, and I was like, I beat them to the punch.
There you go.
I
All of
love it.
which is a detour from the relevant point, which is that we are not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to have more fun than Michael Sussman is allowed to have, because he, unlike the three of us, is actually facing a 2-week trial for a single lie, or alleged lie. Not even quite clear to me that he actually lied. It's the longest one witness case in the history of the U.S. federal judiciary, and
And definitely the most breathlessly covered in various corners of the internet one witness case in U.S. history as
yes.
well.
So Tim, for my sins, I have had my text messages introduced as evidence in the case. I
Hmm.
have been, I've actually had to sit through a lot of the trial, and I am reading every word of the transcript. And yet, I consider myself better off than Tim because I have not had to read the right-wing media coverage of the trial. So Tim, what did you do in a past life that this is your penance
Yeah.
for?
I'm excited to just so we can kind of fill the holes for each other a little bit because
Yeah,
I
exactly. Because I
did
haven't followed the
yeah,
press on it at all.
and I read enough from non-conservative press to feel comfortable about my article about the Sussman trial, but did not get into like reading
There are no
transcript
inac-
territory.
there are no inaccuracies in Tim's article,
Thank you.
except maybe one matter of shading. You were more generous to the New Yorker sense that there is doubt on the question than I would be.
Okay, well,
I
let's get
think
into that.
the
Let's pause that. Let's pause that. And
okay.
I'll just explain to people the starters. I can actually do one more thing before we get bored.
Yeah, of course.
I have this thing I have to do now. Tim has a book coming out, so we
He
can pitch it.
does.
We can discuss it at the very end. But some
No, no,
people
no, no, no.
only
Let's talk about it now because we've got,
a full
105
hour.
people on this
Yeah, and who
thing.
knows?
So
By the
let's,
end, by 2:55, people might be into their rosé a little bit. Some people are allowed to have fun now, so they might be going to soccer. Anyway,
but we're
it's
gonna
called
we're gonna
Why
have
We
you
Did It.
back when the book actually comes
Okay, that's
out,
true.
which is
That's true.
when,
But
right?
pre-orders matter.
Yeah,
The book
pre-orders
comes
matter.
out. The book comes out June 28th. It's
And
What's
what's
the
called
it
name of
called?
it?
It's called Why We Did It, and it was inspired kind of by Ben, but kind of by this audience actually. As my initial idea, I wanted to try my hand at a book. My initial idea was actually inspired by my Bulwark colleague Jonathan V. Last, and the book was going to be Trump is Forever. And the book is going to be kind of about why all of the terrible things about Trump aren't really going anywhere, despite the fact that he lost the election by a lot. Turned out he didn't lose the election by that much, and then a bunch of people stormed the Capitol. So the need for a book about Trump being
Wait,
permanent.
what happened?
Yeah, I know. Isn't that weird? Yeah. So kind of.
People, it does seem like everybody forgot about that.
Yeah, so the need for a
everyone
book to
forgot,
be
but
like
also
Trump will
I'm-
still have influence in our politics going forward felt more like a tweet than a book topic. So I went out looking for another topic, and I think the thing when I come on to in Lieu Fun and others when I engage with other people who are interested in this sort of stuff and are interested enough to read a book, I think people still don't really quite understand why people who knew better went along with Trump. I think there's been a lot of coverage of why the disaffected working class decided to go along with Trump. I think that there's been plenty written about all the craziness that happened with Trump. Plenty written about all the white nationalists and the grifters and all of the worst people around him. But like, what about the shades of gray, right? Like, what about the people who like knew he was bad but decided to go
Like
along with
you.
it anyway?
The
I'm not.
people like you, no, you're out for that, but there were a lot of people like you who stayed in.
Stayed, right? Yeah,
The Tims who didn't bail.
That's exactly right. And I write about this about how I'm not sure, 100% sure, and everybody in the comments can just say you're not going to buy my book after this, but I'm just trying to be honest. I want this book to be totally honest. If it was Ted Cruz who had won, not Trump, might I have justified going in? Right, the Ted Cruz people liked me, like his consultants all used to call me. It was not my side of the party, I was always working for the more moderates, but I knew those people, and might I have justified it? Maybe, right? And so in that way, it is a little bit there. It is a shade of gray in that sense, even though I was not gray at all about Trump. So the book basically it's about 1/3 going back about all of our sins from 2008 to 2016. I to do parallels for people. I look into why as a gay person did I work for anti-gay people or people who are against gay marriage? Like, can we learn anything from that and compare it to why the Trumpers went along with Trump? I look at the autopsy that we worked on. How did a bunch of people who worked on this autopsy like all go different ways? Some of them became never Trumpers, some of them Trump cultists, some of them left politics. And then kind of the last 2/3 of the book is based on interviews I did, and in some cases they wouldn't interview with me, so observations and interviews with their friends about people who fit various categories for why they justified Trump. And I'm hoping that we can, at the end of it, people can be depressed but also entertained, but also maybe learn something that is a little bit universal, which is like, why do people who know better, how do they rationalize it? What are the stories they tell themselves? And how can we learn about maybe convincing those people to do otherwise the next time around? That's my elevator pitch.
I love it. Can I ask a question
Pre-order.
that I'm really curious if
Yeah.
you're going to like talk about in the book? So like one of the things that I think Bill Kristol and a lot of like Never Trumper and like, and Rick and you and like, well, actually not like, I'm just very curious about the men, like the pushback that I would say that a lot of liberals have against someone like Bill Kristol, who is like, you're playing with the enemy did this to us, and so this is why we're here right now. And so I think like I'm just curious, like for like why, like if the name of the book is
Why we did it.
yeah, why we did it, like why did you do, like what did you think you were getting out of conservative Republican politics before Trump? That, like, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that does make sense, and I do try to cover that, and that's why I think it's super important that I did the first third of the book is really about that, right? And I felt like I can't just jump into this at 2015. I need to explain my own actions, and I need to explain other people's, and yeah, I mean, people should read the book obviously, but I think that I think that's a totally fair criticism. I think that there are certain things, certain elements of what we did that I think actually contributed to Trump. I think that there was, on both sides in politics, there's always the both sides. Like there's a sense among people in politics that they're like part of this big game, and it's like the outcomes aren't really as important as like that. Not the election outcomes are important, but like the outcomes for the impact on actual human beings aren't as important as this horse race, as this game. And I think that there's an element about that in Democrats, but it got so bad among Republicans, right? And I think that like from Clinton on, basically, like there was just this culture in Republican politics where there was just a total disconnect between what we were actually providing for people and like our jobs, right? And I think it created a disconnect with our own Republican voters, but also this justification that, oh, who cares, right? Like this is my job. I'm a hack for hire. I'm one of the good ones. This is all part of the game. So I think that's part of it. And then I think there's another part of it that speaks to the rationalizations of people during Trump. I mean, I think that people like Rick and Bill like had legitimate, maybe you disagree with them, but legitimate views about foreign policy and domestic policy that they disagreed with the left on. And then I don't try to judge people on that. I think what our sin was, I think what the Never Trumpers' sin was during that time is that we really glossed over a lot of it quasi evil stuff we were complicit in. Right. And I think Bill would say that if you said that to him, which is like, I genuinely supported this foreign policy thing. I genuinely supported, whatever, No Child Left Behind. I genuinely supported the Bush tax cuts. But at the same time, I knew that there was all this, racist, nativist stuff happening. And I kind of brushed it aside. And I think that was a great sin of ours.
All right. So there is a poll up
sorry, I was
about how.
Go ahead, Ben.
Sorry, I'll yield to you in just a second. There's a poll up where you get to assign exactly how much blame Tim Miller personally bears for the state of the Republican Party and Donald Trump. And I want you all to vote in it because
I just voted myself 50 to 75%. Here's the thing.
That's a delusion of grandeur, man.
I want everybody to vote right now and then purchase the book, and then we'll have a re-vote in July. And I think that I think my numbers will be worse. I think once you learn a little bit more about my dark arts time, I think my guilt will be shared.
I want to say, Ben, this is a great poll. This is amazing. And I really like the poll because, as Tim says, we can develop a baseline and then see what people think after they read the book.
Maybe we should run this poll for every single guest, including ones who have no political background at all. Sorry, you were going to ask something, Kate.
Yeah, sorry. I wanted to get it out before I forgot it. But because my brain's going in a million different ways from Tim's answer, which is just kind of which is also just, I'm really curious as to whether, I actually, as you know, I actually don't agree with the people who kind of say that there was kind of that you're complicit in kind of these, I get the fact that people had a optimism that there was going to be serious policy discussions, or if they put forward serious policy discussions, that those were going to be the things that won the day, and that this nativism thing, or this with the white supremacy lurking in the background, was don't give it air, don't it is gonna, and that ended up not being the case. But there's a lot of Monday night quarterbacking going on in that.
There is Monday night quarterbacking, but the area where I'm the most sympathetic to the Democrats who have this criticism of us is, and this is why I start the book in Iowa in 2007, which is the McCain primary. And it was pretty clear where things were going. I just, as somebody who was actually there and was meeting with the voters who were showing up for that primary, the bad parts that didn't, there were certainly, it's like John McCain was a perfect person, but the very dangerous, conspiratorial, racist, anti-democratic stuff that was revealed.
You were starting to
in
see
2015.
It then?
I saw, and I think that I'm sure someone older than me could write this book and start it in 1988 or whatever. But in 2007 is where I started the book, and you can see it. And then he picks Palin.
I was going to say,
right? And then Palin is, Palin has to be a full chapter of this, right? I mean, John McCain is complicit in that. So is Bill, for that matter. I wasn't. I was out by then, and did not like Sarah Palin. But I think that if you looked at the audiences at Sarah Palin rallies and the audiences at the John McCain events in 2008. I think that anyone who is honest with themselves, saw that there was kind of this dangerous element lurking.
Okay, but Tim,
and people in the singer saying, go back to Newt. Sure, yeah, I'm sure. I really want to focus on things I saw firsthand.
As counsel for the defense, who were you in Iowa working for?
McCain. John McCain. Yeah,
I thought you were there working for Huntsman.
That was 2012.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean,
sorry.
I only
Okay.
work for the moderates. I get what I'm saying though is in between, I took jobs in DC for the party and doing party stuff and like skullduggery on behalf of the party. But like my presidential candidates were always the most moderate person. So again, I'm not, but what I'm saying is that like, John McCain was running that campaign on immigration reform and like cap and trade. So
Right.
it is there's another group of people who are like, there's no difference. I'm like, really? I mean, John McCain was on a McCain Kennedy, worked with Ted Kennedy on an immigration bill and was for climate change action. So, not exactly the same as what's happening now, but he picked Palin. And so anyway, I think that any discussion of this has to look at that.
All right.
Sorry, so we've gotten off, and Ben wants to cross-examine you on something completely different. Ben, I do have to say that your language, even like I can tell that you've been hanging out in court. You're like to make the argument for the defense.
Well, yeah, I've been spending way too much time in court the last week in the most boring case in the history of the federal judiciary. And so I want to start this by asking Tim what conservatives have found interesting about this case.
Yeah,
because I read your piece and I'm like, wow, they found that in it. So walk us through how the Michael Sussman play. Let me interview you about how it's playing, and then we can talk about what the actual case consists of.
Okay, and then I want to interview you at the end about the Alfa Bank thing and the New York article.
Okay.
We got to make sure to get to that. Okay, here's how this all started for me. There are two ways that I get into these articles where I do deep dives on the crazy conservative media. One is that I make a proactive decision that I feel like this is something that merits covering, and I need to suffer through Steve Bannon's podcast for a week in order to understand what's going on. And then other times it just kind of happens in my feed, right? And so this is what happened over the weekend. I had written an article a year ago that was debunking all of these false flag conspiracies about how Hillary and CrowdStrike it wasn't really Russia and Trump. It was actually Ukraine and CrowdStrike and the Italians that hacked the DNC, and it was an inside job. So I wrote this article mocking it. In the tweet promoting that article, I had said, here's an article that pushes back on all the crazy, claims that Hillary tried to frame Trump over the Russiagate scandal. That tweet somehow gets into the conservative media ecosystem, and all of these like deplorables start being like, you've been owned by the Michael Sussman trial. Like, this is like Hillary really was behind all of this. And I'm just like, what are these people talking about? I knew the Sussman trial, but I wasn't following it. So I went and read, Breitbart and Fox and the National Review even, and all these people's Michael Sussman coverage. I was like, what are they talking about? The crux of their main argument here, if we're trying to be as fair to them as possible, is they're trying to say that Trump never had any Russia connections at all, and that the whole Russia scandal is all fabricated by the elite media and Hillary Clinton and Christopher Steele and all these Oppo researchers. Okay. So if you use that as the baseline, which is obviously ridiculous for everyone watching this, but let's just use that mindset as the baseline. And then Robbie Mook testifies at this trial saying that Hillary approved the dissemination of this Alfa Bank Oppo research to the media. The Alfa Bank was this theory, which we'll get into later, Ben, that or not a theory, it was based on some DNS logs that showed that there was some connection between this Russian bank and the Trump organization. Some crazy resistance people started to say basically, oh, this is, their secret channel where they're paying them off for the Russia hacks. But most of the mainstream media just didn't even really talk about it for reasons we'll get into. So Slate did write an article about it. And so I guess during this trial where you can fill some holes, Mook is testifying, and what he actually says is that after I sent this to Slate, I did read in Secretary Clinton and told her that we were passing along this information, and then Clinton sent out a tweet about the story when it ran. And so the media, the MAGA, the right media, their big thing is this is the smoking gun. Like Hillary approved this fake attack on Trump, that fabricated this notion that he had a connection with the Russian bank when he really didn't. But that's not really what happened. What really happened is that the Clinton campaign got this research, these DNS logs from these tech nerds who showed them that there was a connection between these two things. And then the Clinton campaign sent it to a real reporter, Franklin Foer, who's at the Atlantic now, not just some like hack, and said, look into this, right? And like look into this and like write a story, take a look about whether there's anything here. And Slate wrote a story. So like as someone who used to do Oppo research, I was like, I need to write about this to explain this to people, because I understand how someone who doesn't understand how this works might be like, Hillary just fabricated this Russian bank thing and then gave it to their friends in the lib media that wrote this article, and it was a total scam to frame Trump. But like, that's not what happened. Like, some researchers discovered a connection, passed along to the Clinton campaign. They were like, seems like there might be something here, passed along to a reporter. A reporter reported it out and wrote a pretty balanced story, in my opinion, and then actually wrote a second story that was even more skeptical of the notion that this was a real thing. And like, that's just how the system is supposed to work. But the MAGAs have turned this into like Hillary framed Trump, basically. Just that one little testimony from Mueller.
It's interesting that that's what they take away from it, so that they don't take away what's in the opening argument of Durham's prosecutor, which is this is a story about privileged access to the FBI by one political side in an effort to weaponize the FBI against the other side, right? Which I actually think is it's a bad argument, and I suspect it won't win, but it's a more compelling argument, I think, than like that Hillary herself is individually like authorizing these disclosures, especially because if I remember Mook's testimony correctly, it was after he had done it that he kind of alerted Hillary, and she was like,
this was like, I lived through all this. It's like when I would do a Jeb, I'd be like, oh, hey, we'd be in the car, and I'd be like, oh, by the way, I dropped this hit on Marco earlier, and like it's going to be in the paper later, and like you might get asked about it. And he'd be like, oh, okay, cool. Like that was, like that's the kind, I can imagine in my head this exchange. Like just this notion that like Hillary was like orchestrating it with the fake. Here's my problem with the FBI theory, though, which I get into in the article, Ben, and maybe there is privileged access, but it seems like this is a case where this is like Sussman's friend, and then the FBI does nothing. Like, this is also the key part of this story that nobody that like gets completely ignored in the conservative media. The FBI and the New York Times both do nothing with this tip. Like, the FBI looks at it and says that there's nothing here, and then the Times doesn't write a story on the FBI's request.
Yeah, so the FBI, like, it's actually worse than that from the right-wing media's point of view. So the FBI does exactly what you would want the FBI to do, which is they do. So the testimony of the FBI witnesses is Baker, and again, disclosure, Jim Baker is a very close friend of mine, and my texts show up with him in evidence, and so I don't want to pretend to be neutral as to Jim Baker. I'm not. But Baker's testimony is, I received this thing, I agree to meet with the guy because he's a friend and because I trust him as a serious cybersecurity lawyer, and I received this thing. It seemed to have some national security exigency. It comes in the context of the DNC hack investigations and the other Russia investigations. And so my main priority is to get it off my desk as quickly as possible to people who can actually investigate it. So he calls Bill Priestap and Pete Strzok and says, and they send somebody over to pick it up. That person's testimony is that they get instructions to create a chain of custody for it, and to examine it for plausibility. They examine it, they analyze it, they find that it's somewhere between flawed and crazy, and they recommend that no action be taken, and that's essentially what happens. Baker, of course, doesn't know any of this, and so in a few, he then gets knows that the New York Times is going to run with this story, and they have a conversation with the New York Times asking them to hold it, which they do. And
Right.
so,
And then,
so
by the way, this story is that famous New York Times story that ends up what it turns into. The Alfa Bank, the original Alfa Bank story that Lichtenbaum was working on, is the story that turns into that Times story. That's like an FBI looking into Trump-Russia connection sees nothing. I don't have the exact headline memorized, but
right,
that
which
one.
is actually a notorious story in the other direction.
You're right. Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So that's this story. So the Times, if anything, right, tilts way towards the Trump side of this and dismissing the Alfa Bank accusation, totally exonerating Trump. So like this whole deep state cabal that's out to get Hillary,
So that
like did nothing with this story.
Correct.
Maybe rightly, by the way, but which we're going to get.
No, no.
Maybe there was
I think ultimately, I think
I'm saying if it was
ultimately,
a real conspiracy, there was enough there for them to do something with it.
I think ultimately, all the major actors handled this reasonably. The FBI took a look, vetted it, didn't find it credible, didn't do much with it. The New York Times was very careful. Slate was a little bit less careful, ran with it, but ran with it, as you point out, in a quite responsible fashion. I would not have run with it. And actually, the Washington Post at the time asked me to evaluate it, and I told them I didn't think it made sense. I had a reaction very similar to the FBI.
Was that text message? Was that text message of you telling the Washington Post not to cover this presented during the Sussman trial?
No, because it wasn't by text. It was orally. It was a set of conversations with a reporter. No, the text message that was shared was when Durham was appointed to look at this. Poor Jim Baker, who had just been investigated for 2 years or something by John Durham over a bullshit leak issue, texted me, "Oh, great, now I get to be investigated by Durham for another 2 years." And I responded, "Lovely." And that was the sum total of my presence in this. And I had no idea it was going to show up. No, I think the remarkable thing about this story is that Michael Sussman is, and I actually, I don't do predictions. I'm willing to do one here. I don't believe there's a jury in the District of Columbia that would convict him on this. And I think he will be not merely not convicted. I think he will be acquitted, and John Durham will be embarrassed at how quickly it happens.
Total and full exoneration, all caps.
An acquittal is never that, but I don't believe a responsible jury could vote to convict. That said, he is being tried not for the evidence being bullshit. There doesn't seem to be much doubt that he believed the material he was bringing to the FBI was legit. Not for the lie he supposedly told is about whether he had a client. He texted Jim and told Jim, "I'm here on my own behalf, not on behalf of any client," whereas in fact he represented both the Clinton campaign and this tech executive, Rodney Jaffe, who did this work. And as best as I can tell, absolutely nothing turns on this question of who he represented. It's just a vehicle for Durham to feed these right-wing theories that there's a large, group of Mark Elias and Fusion GPS and Glenn Simpson and Chris Steele and Sussman are all kind of conspiring together to trick the FBI into investigating Trump in the run-up to the election. And that's I think Durham has entirely bought that belief, and this indictment is a weird reflection of that.
Why do you think that this does not turn on the question of whether he told them who he represented? Isn't that the only question that is relevant?
Oh no, that's the only question. I mean, nothing turns on it in the way the FBI handled it. So he
right.
comes
It's this
there.
broad conspiracy. It's like
He
even
comes
if this
there.
guy lied to them, that's like a one-off thing, right? Like
Yeah. So let's say he was lying through his teeth, and for reasons we can go into, I'm actually skeptical of that. I don't know Michael Sussman at all. We've never met, and I don't have a dog in the fight of whether he was lying or being or in error or speaking carelessly or whatever he was. But you know, the FBI took this information, did a look-see on it, didn't do much with it, and if it had had a big sign on it, that if they had written in big red pen on it, magic marker, Hillary gave you this, or if Hillary Clinton had stood up at a press conference and said, I want the FBI to investigate, here's the data, they still would have done a quick look-see and made roughly the same judgment. And so it's not actually clear to me, other than as a vehicle for these conspiracy theories, what the supposed gravamen of the thing is, except that it gives you a lot of opportunity to feed Breitbart things like Robbie Mook had a conversation with Hillary Clinton, right? And I, you know, I'm bewildered by it. And frankly, if the issue were merely convicting Michael Sussman, you could try this case in 2 days. It's a 2-week case because they're bringing in all this other shit that has nothing to do with the lie, including events that happen 3 months after the lie. Well,
Like
if
what?
it's a meeting with a CIA guy, in which the lie was supposedly repeated, but it's not indicted, it's not charged, right? And so if the question is one meeting with Jim Baker on one day, you need about, I don't know, 10% of what's being presented. But they had Mark Elias there for almost an entire day.
Why are people not objecting to this being like outside like the scope of the issue at trial? Like I don't
You know,
understand.
so I don't actually understand that either. It's all in the indictment, and it's this. I said at the time the indictment was issued that it's a speaking indictment, except that it's speaking in tongues. You know, it's like it's a 20-page indictment in incredible detail about matters that aren't obviously germane at all to the
Yeah.
supposed lie that he told. Now, I think the reason why the defense hasn't like tried to pare shit way down, actually I suspect is a tactical matter that
Like just to
they're,
like flood the zone with so much shit that they like hope
well,
that it like
also
doesn't like there's
let
nothing.
them look like ridiculous conspiracy theorists, you know, and
Yeah.
you know, like they get to make a closing argument that says this is irrelevant, this is irrelevant, this is irrelevant. The only thing that's relevant is what happens in this half an hour meeting in which my client allegedly said this to Jim Baker. Here's the reasons why there's a reasonable doubt about that. Everything else is crazy conspiracy theory shit. And I think they may have just made a tactical judgment to, you know, let the crazy shine through a little bit.
Um, I have two questions for you, Ben, about this that you can just take in either order. One is like, so what is your sense of Durham outside of this? Like, is there other stuff coming? Like, or is Sussman going to be the gold jewel of this multi-year
Well,
Durham investigation?
so I don't think there's more coming. The statute of limitations has run on anything that took place in the 2016 election cycle. He was clearly after a couple of FBI agents, that statute of limitations ran in January or February. Those people's names haven't become public, and I'm not going to make them public. That was 2 or 3 people that he was really on. And what else has he got? He got Kevin Kleinsmith, who is what happens when a lawyer mates with a Labrador Retriever. You kind of get a big. That's mean, and I shouldn't have said that. No, Kevin is a guy who's like the least likely person to have meaningful criminal intent in the world, but he did doctor something for whatever reason, doctored something in an email, falsified something, and pled guilty to it. So he was an FBI lawyer. That's Durham's one conviction so far. He has also indicted, and this is going to be his big case, Viktor Danchenko, who was the primary subsource for the Steele dossier.
Right.
And Danchenko's case gives rise to a lot of conspiracy theories about my employer, the Brookings Institution, because once upon a decade ago, he used to be the research assistant for one Fiona Hill at Brookings. And therefore, when they were working at Brookings, of course, Ukraine did it, right? So Danchenko, I think Durham has him dead to rights on a bunch of stuff. I have followed that case much less closely, honestly, because it doesn't involve the conduct of the FBI. It doesn't involve people I know, and except in the most distant sense. And I got dragged into it because Durham subpoenaed Brookings for material related to Danchenko's employment records. But I think Danchenko has a serious problem. I think he clearly, and Durham's, going to get some kind of plea or conviction on him. That said, I think that's kind of all he's going to get, and then he's going to write a report that I suspect will lay the rest of it out in a way that will be, exciting to the, very tittillating to the Breitbarts and
the people who
Laura
know the
Ingrams
entire,
the
the entire universe, constellation of like minor characters. And
a lot of people who put pins in their wall and draw strings between them will have a lot of pins to draw, and I suspect it'll be a huge pain in my ass because a lot of them think that I'm the puppeteer who runs all this shit.
Yeah. I want to go back. So you had some doubts on the Alfa Bank thing. So again, when this happened in 2016, I just didn't care about it. Like it was one of those things where it was like, maybe this is something, I don't know. I'd already seen enough to know that like what was happening was bad. So like this one little other piece of evidence on the fire, like log on the fire, didn't matter to me. It was like Trump has been cheering this stuff on. Like his opponent's getting attacked. It was wildly inappropriate. Like he was guilty for me as soon as he said Russia, if you're listening. So all the behind the scenes shit didn't really matter.
By the way, that's the right answer. Right? Yeah. That's the collusion. Right? Yeah. They hacked.
He was guilty from
and
that.
And he said, could you please hack more? That's right, publicly. Right? Publicly. To everyone who says there's a Russia collusion hoax, just like that's really all you need. And he was at the same time trying to build a tower in Moscow and lying about it publicly. And that's really all you need to know.
Yeah, there's not much. Anyway, that was me. So point being, I didn't follow it that closely. I looked at it, I was like, maybe something will be there, maybe not. So then when I was relearning about this, write the article for this morning, I leaned on the New Yorker article, which I think you have some issues with. So before we get into your issues in the New Yorker article, the one piece of the one thing that titillated me the most as a potentially interesting nugget was that Lichtblau at the Times goes to Alfa Bank's lobbyists, BGR, which is a big time lobbyist group in DC, on the 21st of September of 2016. He says to them, hey, looking into this server connection, I need to talk to somebody at Alfa Bank to try to get to the bottom of this, get their response. 2 days later, poof, goes away. The Trump side, on the Trump side, Alfa Bank doesn't take it down. The Trump organization takes it down. Now, so I guess the Occam's razor easiest theory of that is that like the Republican at BGR like fucking calls up his buddy Paul Manafort and is like, hey Paul, like you guys should take care of this. The Times looking into it, where that isn't that big of a conspiracy. But I mean, obviously the more conspiratorial thing is that the BGR talked to their client, and BGR denies that they did that, by the way, is that they talked to their client, Alfa Bank, and that Alfa Bank somehow sent a message to Trump, which would be eyebrow raising. So why does that not raise eyebrows for you?
So the first reason is when the New York Times had this story, they kicked up a shitload of dust. Yeah. And a lot of people knew about it. The Times was not the only paper who knew about it. The Wall Street Journal knew about it. The Washington Post knew about it. And so, by the time Sussman goes to the FBI, I believe he told the FBI, he told Baker that he was expecting a story in one of several papers. And so the fact that somebody, it's not clear to me that the direct line was, they approach Alfa Bank picks up the phone and says, comrade collusionist, take down the server, right? Like, it may be something much more prosaic than that. Everybody in Washington knew about this, who was doing the collusion stuff. And so it gets back to the Trump people and they take down the server.
Got it.
The reason I'm
go ahead.
The reason I'm skeptical of the story is frankly exactly the same reason that the FBI was skeptical of the story, which is if you want to have a secret channel of communication between Alfa Bank and the Trump organization, you use a program that we all have on our phone called Signal, and or iMessage or WhatsApp, all of which are reasonably end-to-end encrypted, or even Snapchat, which disappears. These things, Snapchat's not very secure, but there are way more secure ways to do it than to have a dedicated email server called Trump Mail, that's pinging a known Alfa Bank server on, with DNS records. And I just think the notion that would be how you would set up a secure line of communication is kind of silly, and the FBI's conclusion that it was almost certainly some kind of a spam server, pinging potential addressees just makes a lot more sense. I also think the likelihood that over the course of the Mueller investigation, as they were talking to people, somebody wouldn't have whispered in, Aaron Zebley or Weissman's ear, that server thing is for real, I think is pretty minimal. And so I've always thought
that there was like a different kind of dumb criminal reason for it, that it wasn't at all related to collusion, but more like some old Russian, fucking laundering their money, who had Alfa Bank back in the 90s, was using that.
Sure, and the server was still there.
Yeah,
right?
It's just still rolling from their their payments for their Trump Tower, condo that they were using to launder their Russian cash, back in the aughts.
I also think that there was clearly some. So the cyber division took one look at this and said, "This is silly." There's literally a text exchange in which they use the code for mental illness And one of the agents texts the other and says, this is, I think the code is 1505. This is looking a little 1505-ish to me. So that's like the cyber division's reaction. Counterintelligence took it a little more seriously because they already had the Trump collusion stuff, but they ultimately sort of discard it too. And I don't have any reason to second guess that. So my basic instinct is I'm perfectly happy to believe it was bullshit, especially because Lawfare didn't do anything with it, and I have no, dog in the fight. We never, like the Steele dossier, we never took it very seriously. We're not I don't have any skin in the game, so I'm not that I would defend it because sure. I have skin in the game, but we didn't get interested in it for a reason. And I don't feel any particular need to, defend Rodney Jaffe's work product. That said, 5150. Thank you, Steve. That said, I certainly don't think it was a criminal conspiracy to bring it to the FBI, and I do really worry that if you start indicting people who bring tips to the FBI that turn out to be wrong because 4 years later, 5 years later, you decide that they lied about who their clients are, not that they lied about the tip. The data was real, right? So it's like, I'm bringing you, hey, Tim Miller, robbed the bank, and I'm bringing you a tip about that. And by the way, I'm not wearing a rhinoceros shirt. And then you indict me because though Tim actually robbed the bank and there was a real thing to think about there, I was wearing a rhinoceros shirt, right? Like that's a bad move just as an incentive for bringing tips to the Bureau.
Yeah. Well, we can take questions for other people. My last on this, just because this is your area, my area is just defending Oppo researchers. I would just say, the practice of sending a half-baked piece of research to the New York Times and having them say, nah, I'm not seeing it, and then to send it to kind of a more partisan outlet and having that more partisan outlet, write it in a responsible fashion, sort of offering a just asking questions version of this. That method has uncovered many scandals that were actually true over the years, right? Because the Times and the Post and all these guys have to have a higher standard, and the Wall Street Journal have to have a higher standard for accepting this stuff because of the paper of record. I mean, go back to the Bush era and the Dan Rather stuff and all the Iraq war, a lot of even that asshole Glenn Greenwald, a lot, you know what I mean? A lot of these real scandals were revealed that way. And it's there's nothing nefarious about that process that's why I was defending Franklin. He might have gilded the lily a little more for your taste, Ben, but it was a totally reasonable article, and they went through a process that has been used before.
So just to be clear, I don't think Frank did anything wrong. I would not personally have run with that story, and I didn't. Because I couldn't figure out what the thread was, and I never believed it. But somebody can reasonably make a different judgment on that than I did. The New York Times made more or less the same judgment that I did. Frank made a different judgment, and he's had to answer for it in public 300 times between then and now. And he defends his work, and the New Yorker more or less defends his work.
Pizzagate and Hillary fell, and the way that all these assholes treated all this is the other thing. And bullshit constantly. Frank
exactly.
Has had you know what I mean? Correct.
Frank has had to answer for it. And by the way, this is important. The data is real. The data is not fabricated. It's not. The question is, what does the data mean? And I think, he didn't say this means there's a connection. Right. He said it raises a question. Well, it did raise a question. Mateo.
A 5550 or 5150 question. Hello, Mateo.
Hello.
What's up, man?
too much.
Mateo, how does one end up with like a lap full of plant right before you go live on a web stream? What is happening? Why do you have a plant in front of your face?
Just putting things in order.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, okay.
Notice that Mateo is looking very Californian.
It's true. But that's true however I'm looking, because I'm in
Wait.
California.
Tim, are you what is that? Is that a
Plant. I wanted to be like Mateo and put a plant in front of myself for this question.
You know what? Lean
This
in.
was a plant at one point. Okay, anyway.
Anyway.
We're all super cute with our plans. Except for me. Go ahead, Mateo.
Sure. So my question is about the value of fact-checking things like this, given that I don't think that
Never
anyone-
fact check anything. Just run with it.
Yeah. Well, like, but the point is, but like when you talk to people who are really into this sort of stuff, they're not saying like, "Oh, I mean, they'll say they read the
What
indictment, they
sort
never
of
read
stuff?
the indictment. Like people who are excited about Hillary
Durham.
being corrupt, or
Hillary
Durham,
Gate.
or Breitbart, or whatever. And
I note that you'll leave the Biden laptop conspiracy off of this list, but anyways.
sure, them too, like people who get excited about that. I don't follow any of that stuff. I have no idea what the status of that is. But the point is, like, to someone like that who's really excited about this stuff, this is just like Michael Sussman said it or whatever. And I don't know how you counteract that, just like the association value of stories like this in creating the vague concept that Hillary is corrupt and evil.
Mateo, I totally relate to your nihilism and the fact that nothing matters. I do appreciate that, and that resonates.
We're
with
training him up real good.
I will say that, like, 8% of people don't read any of this shit, right, at all. So, in some ways, you're screaming to avoid. What I think, when I try to intervene on these and write about them, I feel like there are two things that I bring to the table that make something worth writing about. One is when something is getting traction with like the college-educated, very soft MAGA crowd. Right, like I think about people in my life who just didn't go full anti-Trump like me. They used to be Republicans. They probably, they didn't vote for him. But people get caught up in this sort of stuff, and they do read it. And I think that it's important, in certain situations, especially when like the Wall Street Journal Ed Board. It'd be one thing if this was just Gateway Pundit. When the Wall Street Journal Ed Board is saying that this proves that Hillary is worse than Putin, they literally wrote that. The Wall Street Journal Ed Board, like. Reasonable people read the Wall Street Journal Ed Board, and it would be.
Did they really?
Yes, I mean.
Yeah.
I told you I've read nothing about this except the transcripts themselves.
More dangerous disinformation than Putin. That Hillary spread more dangerous disinformation than Putin. So I would like to have something that people can send to their dad who reads the Wall Street Journal Ed Board, who is not a MAGA conspiracist who knows about the entire extended universe of Tucker show, right? Like so that is one thing. And then I think the other thing I like to do is in these situations, because the conservative media is following this more closely, like that Wall Street Ed Board article is very simple to understand their case. I mean, it's a stupid case, but it's simple to understand. And I think that a lot of times on the left, it's like, read this 18,000 word New Yorker article and then you'll get it. You know what I mean? Or read like the actual indictment.
I mean,
the nice thing about the Bulwark is I can try to write something that's like, here's a simple explanation of why this is stupid.
Or the New York Times Ed Board writes something and the entire left jump all over it for like basically like we've had academics saying this for the last 20 or 30 years. So like why are we suddenly paying attention to this now? Or like whatever. It's just like it eats its own. So I think that's a great point actually.
So I agree with your nihilism, but that's why I did it.
I just want to say there's one reason to disagree with your nihilism, which is that in a case like this, which is that somebody could actually go to prison. And, I'm not trying to influence a jury, but I do think you have an obligation in a situation in which it's not just informational flows and this is somebody's actual life. And like trying to have a responsible debate about a trial, like it's completely irresponsible of the Wall Street Journal to to talk about a trial like this in that fashion. And just there's a value to calling bullshit on that, particularly when someone's freedom is actually at stake.
Agree. See you,
Paula, you
Hey,
look like
Paula.
you have just come from your first day at work or something.
Because I did just come from my
Oh,
first
just a guess. I was just reading, your demeanor and stuff.
It wasn't the blazer, anyways.
Or the perfectly coiffed hair, or the
blazer does say first day on the job to me.
yeah, it really, you have
I
an air about you. How'd it
I
go?
wore sneakers with my pantsuit, so I feel like that really gave it a
I'm
more young
I'm the
look.
cool entry level staffer. I'm business, but still cool.
Is that cool? I thought that was like the practical mom that had given up caring about what she looked like.
No.
No, no. Wait, no.
Whoa,
Kate said it. Kate said it, not me.
Paula, your question before Kate has an opportunity to walk that back.
I feel like this is when I got it. I had an Equinox for one of my old cars, and someone kept telling me I had a mom car.
Okay, listen. I really did mean that, as a person who is not a mom, who just has a bad back and has just stopped wearing heels or anyway. So Tim, stop it, Tim. Hi, Paula. Go ahead.
We are so not letting you off the hook for that.
I know.
So my question is, what is the role of party leadership in kind of suppressing the extremism? Because everyone talks about McCain knowing, or other leaders who are running the GOP, but it's not an actual role. There's no role in the party that says keep crazy people with extreme views out. No. Liz Cheney kind of does that. Adam Kinzinger does that, but they're actually being pushed out of the party. It's not really something within the party. So if the party is going to get back on track in some way, that's a big if. What is the role of someone like that? Is that someone who's a staffer? Is that someone who's an elected person or someone running?
Yeah, well, first I want to say that my first car at 16 was a Toyota RAV4, and that people told me that I was driving a mom car, which as a closeted gay boy was a really much...
That's a body blow.
That's a body blow. So I got that. Anyway, Paula. So I write about this a little bit in the book, why we did it. You can pre-order it today.
Wait, I'll drop another link.
Thank you. About Mitt Romney in 2012. All of the elements that led to the big lie were there in 2012. Karl Rove was on Fox saying that Mitt really won against Obama. There was this huge internet push of believing that the polls were skewed and were biased against Mitt Romney.
Unskew the polls.
There was all the same people that are talking about voter fraud now in the far right activist community were out then. Mitt that night, on election night in 2012, talked with my former business partner, his campaign manager at the time, Matt Rhodes, and asked him what he thinks he should do as far as should I wait to give a concession speech? Should I call Obama? Should I wait to see these recounts? And Matt said, you don't want to be a sore loser. Okay, like John Kerry. I love that this is funny now. In retrospect, it was John Kerry who's a sort of lizard. Kerry waited the next day before he called Bush.
What? Yeah. Oh, is that?
He didn't do anything like Trump, but that just shows you how different we are for now.
He didn't whelp into a microphone like John Dean. So there's that. So.
That's true. So he said, you don't want to be a sore loser. Just it's not going to happen. Let's just call it. And so when I tell you that story to talk about the role of responsible leadership when it comes to conspiracy theories, is that mattered. That Mitt and Rhodes were there instead of Trump and Corey Lewandowski mattered, right? And the reason why the Capitol was not stormed, and that tens of millions of people don't think that election was stolen, was not anything to do with what happened in the election, but everything to do with the candidate and the people around them. So. This is where when I talk to I'm gone from being a Republican. They're never going to win me back. At least as long as all these assholes are alive and are going to staff the White House. Who are complicit in this. But this is when I tell my friends who are still sticking around, why what them acting responsibly matters, because the best hope for the party is not Tim Miller and pro gay marriage, pro believing in climate change, pro-immigration party. Like that party's never happening. Okay. Like the party that potentially could come back is like the best case scenario is like this Boris Johnson style, UK kind of like quasi-nationalist party that maybe has some people at the top of it who act responsibly and are actual public servants, who don't listen to the most crazy in their base, when these big choices happen. That's not perfect. I'm not saying that anyone should vote for that party or whatever, or that they should be excused from any little red meat they throw to their little nativist fans. But like having those people in positions of power does matter. And that's why hopefully at some point when Trump fucking croaks, the next crop will come in and have a little bit more responsibility, and we won't be at a democratic crisis. At least we'll just have some baddies, with bad views on immigration running the party.
We are going to leave it there. I want to comment briefly on the hair issue because somebody needs to stand up for Kate here. Kate does this show every fucking day, or every day that we do it. I never brush my hair for the show. And by the way, my hair used to be longer than Kate's. When we started the show, Kate's was about the same length as mine. So if you're razzing Kate about the state of her hair on the show, watch a different show, guys. There are many shows you can watch where everyone's perfectly made up and they don't have this shine over here because there's somebody whose job it is to do this. And we've all done those shows. This ain't that show. This is the show where Paula is the only one who's appropriately dressed and Tim looks gorgeous and we are slubs.
Tim is literally making us look like we wouldn't get into any, even the diviest bars in DC would turn us away right now in my overalls. And
I think that you look hip, and was so happy to see you, and I don't have any complaints. You're a 10 out of 10 for me.
Thanks, Tim.
We will be back on Wednesday. Tim, you're a great American. It's great to see you. I'm glad you wrote the piece. Everybody, read the piece, buy the book. We're going to be back on Wednesday with Julian Koo, my friend and Lawfare contributor, who is going to talk about the U.S. abandonment of strategic ambiguity as a posture toward Taiwan. This is a great thing that happened this morning while we were all asleep. Joe Biden just said yup when asked if we would defend Taiwan militarily. It's been 40 years that a president has been unwilling to say that. And
our neocon president.
Exactly. Our great neocon president, Joe Biden, who has not involved us in any wars. It's a great day. And we're going to talk to Julian about it. That'll be 46 hours and 55 minutes from now. And until then, Tim and Kate.
We don't have fun anymore, but the pearl necklaces that you've hidden away that you couldn't wear, because I have a pearl necklace that someone gave me for graduating from high school, Tim, and now I'm going to wear it. You've just given me I'll wear it with my overalls.
Do it.
I'm going to start wearing a pearl necklace. I think you've inspired me. And
they're
with dog shirts. Yeah, it's the new dog. Pearl necklace is the new dog shirt. See you later.
That's a way to ruin pearl necklaces. Goodbye.
Whoa.